Welcome to the Gifts from Outside Sources Quick Start Guide. If you're watching this video, you have probably encountered an ethics question dealing with gifts to federal employees from sources outside of the government. In this short video, we'll briefly explain the Gifts from Outside Sources rule, some key definitions, and a microprocess that will help you navigate these rules accurately and efficiently. Then, we'll go through a short example of how to use the GIFS microprocess. And finally, we'll share with you some courses that can help you continue learning about the gift rules and how to apply them. Let's start at the beginning. Why are we concerned with gifts to federal employees at all? Essentially, we are concerned that gifts may actually or apparently influence federal employees who receive them to prefer or favor gift givers. Routine gift giving can also create an unfair expectation. The expectation that one must give gifts to federal employees to receive fair treatment or services. Both are undesirable and detract from the public confidence in government. So what do the ethics rules say about gifts to federal employees from sources outside of the government? The rule contains two general prohibitions. 1. Employees are generally prohibited from soliciting or accepting gifts from a quote-unquote prohibited source. That's a strange phrase. We'll take a look at it more closely in a moment. And 2. Employees are generally prohibited from soliciting or accepting gifts given because of their official positions. It is important to note that these are distinct and separate prohibitions. So, if a gift meets only one or the other, it is still prohibited. It needn't meet both prohibitions. These standards are broad, so OGE has issued a series of exceptions that allow employees, where appropriate, to accept some gifts that would be covered under the general prohibitions. We'll look at these exceptions in a moment as well. OGE also understands that sometimes exceptions can undermine the purpose of the rule. So it has issued some factors to consider before accepting a gift that would be allowed by an exception. For example, OGE recommends declining gifts, even if permitted by an exception, if they would provide the donor with disproportionate access to government processes or decision-making. So we have two prohibitions, we have a handful of exceptions, and we have some factors to help us decide if using an exception is a good idea. We're beginning to see the outline of the gift rule. Next, let's look at some definitions. The first and perhaps most obvious is our definition of gift. In the rule, a gift includes any gratuity, favor, discount, entertainment, hospitality, loan, forbearance, or other item having monetary value. It includes services as well as gifts of training, transportation, local travel, lodgings and meals, whether they are provided in kind, by purchase of a ticket, payment in advance, or reimbursement after the expense has been incurred. So that's it. That's basically anything. But then we do have some exclusions from the definition. You can see them here on your screen. If something being offered is excluded from the definition of a gift, that's it. Our analysis needn't continue. What is being offered is not a gift, so it is not covered by the rule. Another important definition we'll need to understand is the definition of prohibited source. Under the rule, a prohibited source is someone who is seeking official action by the employee's agency, does business or seeks to do business with the employee's agency, conducts activities regulated by the employee's agency, has interests that may be substantially affected by the performance or non-performance of the employee's official duties, or is an organization a majority of whose members are described in these 4 factors. Okay, so we have the prohibitions, some definitions, the exceptions, and the considerations for declining otherwise permissible gifts. How does all of this fit together? Let's take a look at a process chart that helps to assemble the pieces. At OGE, we call this the gifts microprocess. In this chart, you can begin to see how we fit the pieces of the regulation together to respond to a question involving gifts from outside sources. First, we have our considerations for declining an otherwise permissible gift. If it is a bad idea or will potentially hurt the agency, employees can always elect to decline a gift. The factors we use to make this determination, value, timing, identity, and access, are sometimes called the VTIA analysis. Next, we must find out if the item offered meets the definition of a gift. If it doesn't, it may be accepted. If it is a gift, we need to decide if it meets one of the general prohibitions. Namely, is the gift being solicited or offered because of the employee's official position? Or is the gift being solicited or offered by a prohibited source? If the gift meets one of these prohibitions, remember, it needn't meet both. The gift is prohibited and should not be accepted unless indicated in the next step. And what is the next step? The next and final step is finding out if an exception applies. Exceptions allow for the acceptance of gifts that otherwise meet the definition of a gift, and one or more of the prohibitions. Exceptions and exclusions differ in an important way. An exclusion from the definition of a gift is something that simply isn't covered by the gift rule, and an exception is a gift and does meet the general prohibition, but is still permissible under the rule. Exceptions cover lots of common situations where a gift might meet the general prohibition, but acceptance would be unlikely to be corrosive to the public trust. For example, there is an exception for gifts of a nominal value. These are gifts valued at less than $20 per occasion and less than $50 per year per donor. And there's an exception for gifts associated with outside business activities, for example, an employee's own outside job. If you aren't already, you should become familiar with all of the exceptions before advising employees on the gift rules. The IEG has developed a course of study to help you familiarize yourself with all aspects of the rule and the exceptions. Before we conclude this quick start guide, let's use the gift microprocess to look at a simple gifts question. Let's consider our employee Jan. Jan has been invited by a neighbor for a barbecue for everyone on the cul-de-sac. Jan's neighbor happens to work for a company that is regulated by our agency. Let's start with our appearance or VTIA factors. Does the value of the barbecue seem likely to agitate against attending the barbecue? Probably not, unless we had information that it was an extraordinarily expensive barbecue. The value is not likely a concern. How about timing? Unless we had information that a matter involving the neighbor's employer was imminent or pending, it is unlikely that the timing would agitate against accepting the invitation. How about identity? We might want to first know if Jan is assigned to matters affecting the neighbor's employer. If not, the identity is probably not a concern. How about access? Much like identity, unless we have information that Jan is working on matters affecting the neighbor's employer, this probably won't be an obstacle to attending the neighborhood barbecue. For the sake of this exercise, let's assume that none of these factors are obstacles to attending the barbecue. Let's look at our next step. Is the invitation a gift? Take a moment to review the 10 exclusions from the definition on the bottom of the screen. Do any of these seem to apply? The only one that is really close is modest food items, But we know from the longer definition that this applies only to food items offered other than as part of a meal and excludes alcoholic beverages. It is unlikely this exclusion would apply to a barbecue, so it seems that we have a gift. Next, we need to look at our prohibition. Is this gift being offered because of Jan's official position, or being offered by a prohibited source? Remember, we only need to meet one of these prohibitions. Because the entire cul-de-sac is being invited, it is unlikely that the invitation is motivated by Jan's official position. How about prohibited sources? We know from the definition of prohibited source that anyone who does or seeks business with our agency is a prohibited source. The neighbor hosting the barbecue works for a regulated company, so we know the neighbor is a prohibited source. Because the neighbor is a prohibited source, we know the invitation meets the prohibition. So if Jan is going to accept the gift, we need to find an exception that applies. Let's take a look at our exceptions. Less than $20? Maybe. Today, hospitality at a barbecue is likely more than $20, so let's continue. Next, gifts based on a personal relationship. This looks like it might work. We have some considerations, but it looks like this will work. The circumstances we have indicate that this gift is motivated by general neighborliness, a kind of personal relationship. The only other exception that looks likely is the exception for social invitations, but this only works if the host is not a prohibited source. We know the neighbor is a prohibited source, so we can't use this exception. So let's review. First, it doesn't look like our VTIA factors agitate towards declining the invitation. Second, the invitation meets the definition of a gift. Third, the gift is being offered by a prohibited source, so it meets one of our prohibitions. And fourth and finally, we have an exception that would allow Jan to accept the gift. That's it. 4 steps to analyze gifts from outside sources questions. With practice, you'll get to know all of the exclusions and exemptions as well. You can start that learning journey by working through the course of study linked below. Thanks for joining us, and good luck in your development as an ethics official.